The sentence arrived without warning. My brother stood near the fireplace with his hands folded like a preacher delivering sermon in a church packed with judges. The room had already been arranged against me. My mother positioned at the far end of the sofa, aunts flanking her like guards, cousins scattered in careful formations. Papers rested on the coffee table, organized in neat stacks, already arranged, already decided. I wasn't supposed to be here, but here I was, and the air felt thick with rehearsed finality. "Elena is unfit to be involved," my brother said, his voice steady and certain. Unfit. The word detonated in my chest like something physical. My lungs tightened. Heat crawled up my neck and flooded my face, turning it crimson. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, measuring my reaction, waiting for me to break. But I didn't speak. Couldn't. My throat had closed. Instead I watched. I watched the way his eyes avoided mine. A flicker of hesitation before he'd spoken, then resolved avoidance after. I watched the way my mother nodded too quickly, her jaw tight, like she'd practiced this moment in the mirror. I watched the way my aunts exchanged glances, not in surprise but in confirmation, as if they'd been told to expect this exact word, this exact phrasing. My name felt like it belonged to someone else now. Like I was watching a scene where an actress named Elena was being destroyed while the real me stood outside the narrative. That's when I understood with absolute clarity. The decision had been made long before I walked into that room. Days before. Maybe weeks. Maybe longer. I'd been written out of the story before I even knew a story was being told. The betrayal wasn't loud or angry. It was calm, polite, final. It was worse because of that. Anger I could have fought. Noise I could have responded to. But this composed destruction felt unavoidable. As the room stayed silent, pregnant with discomfort that no one wanted to address, I realized something that would matter for everything that came next. This wasn't about my capability or my fitness for anything. This was about control. This was about someone reshaping the family narrative to center themselves. And I was the obstacle being removed. The meeting ended and people scattered. Chairs scraped against hardwood. Conversations shifted to safer topics. My aunt whispered, "It's for the best," without meeting my eyes. Silence was easier than speaking. My mother gathered papers from the coffee table, careful and deliberate, avoiding any gesture that might acknowledge what had just happened. She didn't hug me. She just left. That night, alone in my room, I replayed every word my brother had spoken. They were too smooth, too organized. He'd planned every second, every word chosen, every pause calibrated. He'd rehearsed this, perfecting his delivery until it felt inevitable. Around 2 a.m., I opened my laptop and scrolled through old family emails. I scrolled backward through months of messages, watching how my brother's language had transformed. There it was, the moment when his emails shifted from inclusive, "we should probably decide together," to authoritative, "I've decided what needs to happen." Suggestions became commands. My name stopped appearing in decisions I'd always been consulted on. The pattern unsettled me. But something else settled in my chest. Curiosity. If this was planned, then mistakes existed. And if mistakes existed, so did the truth. I saved every email. I found it by accident while scrolling through old threads. A message from 4 months earlier, before the declaration, before everything fractured. My brother had written to me about a family business decision he was struggling with. "You're the most reliable one," his words read. "The one I trust most with important decisions. I don't know what I'd do without your perspective." He'd asked for my advice. He'd actually listened to it. He'd implemented suggestions I'd made. I read it 3 times, trying to reconcile this version of me with the broken, unfit version he'd presented to the family days ago. The timelines didn't match. They couldn't possibly match. How could someone go from being the most trusted member of a family to being completely unfit for involvement in the span of a few months? The math didn't work. The logic didn't hold. I felt the urge to march downstairs and demand he explain. Demand he reconcile these 2 completely contradictory versions of who I was. Demand that he account for this stunning reversal. But I stopped myself. A small, quiet voice in my mind whispered, "Not yet." Confrontation now only gives him time to rebuild. It locks him into defensive position. It lets him strengthen his story. Instead, I saved the message to a folder I created called Inconsistencies. Then I looked for more. Texts where he'd asked for my opinion before major decisions. Notes about conversations where he'd valued my judgment. Shared files where he'd asked for my input and actually incorporated my suggestions. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that proved innocence or guilt. Just fragments that told a different story than the one he'd sold to the family. I didn't organize them yet. I just collected them like someone gathering evidence without yet knowing what crime to prove. I felt the urge to fight rise in my chest, to defend myself, to set the record straight, to force people to see the truth. But I stopped myself. Instead, I created a spreadsheet. Exact words. Who was present when? Witnesses. Timeline. And I watched how my brother behaved around me after the declaration. He was confident, almost careless. He moved through the house like someone who believed absolutely that his narrative had solidified, that his power was unquestionable, that the label he'd given me would end any conversation before it started. That belief would become his weakness. I didn't need to prove him wrong yet. I needed him comfortable. I needed him to believe he'd won. Being called unfit by your own family rewires how people treat you in ways that are subtle but devastating. Suddenly, my opinions were met with polite smiles. The kind that don't reach eyes. The kind that mean I'm listening to be kind, not because your words matter. Invitations came late, or not at all. When family decisions needed to be made, I wasn't consulted. I became an observer in rooms I once helped lead. I watched from the periphery as my brother filled the space easily, speaking for the family, rewriting our history with casual authority. Elena used to contribute significantly, but we've learned it's better if we handle this without her. I heard these words at least 3 times that month. No one challenged him. Not because they agreed with the assessment. Because it felt easier not to. Because confronting it would require acknowledging that something wrong had happened, and that would be uncomfortable. That realization hurt more than his words. Still, I kept quiet. I took mental notes like someone documenting a crime. The way he exaggerated small mistakes I'd made years ago, inflating them into character flaws. The way he interrupted others before they could add nuance or context that might complicate his narrative. The way he dismissed details he hadn't prepared for with a laugh that was meant to shut conversation down immediately. At night, I organized my findings into folders on my laptop. Separate files. Backed up to the cloud. Cross-referenced. I wasn't building a case yet. I was building patience. I was building evidence. I was learning how patience could be a strategy. I reminded myself, lying in bed in the dark, that truth doesn't rush. People do. And rushed people make mistakes. Rushed people panic. Rushed people expose themselves. One evening at dinner, while my brother was mid-story about a family decision, my cousin interrupted with a question. Wait, didn't Elena handle that project? I remember her saying something different about how that went. For just a second, a fraction of a second, I watched my brother panic. His jaw tightened. His hand paused halfway to his mouth. His eyes went flat. Then he recovered. He laughed. He shifted the conversation. He made a joke that was meant to dismiss the question entirely. But I'd seen it. That moment of exposure. That crack in the armor. He could be shaken. My brother loved an audience. At every family dinner, he retold the story of my decline, polishing it each time. I listened closely, noting every change. The story shifted depending on who was present. With my mother, he emphasized burden and responsibility. With cousins, he played the concerned protector. With aunts, he sounded reluctant and regretful. That inconsistency mattered. If he was telling the truth, the story wouldn't need editing based on the audience. I stayed neutral. When people asked me questions, I answered simply. Only. No emotion. Calmness unsettled him more than anger would have. One evening I caught him correcting a detail too fast. He'd said I'd made a major mistake in a project decision. My mother asked for specifics and he fumbled. His answer tangled. He corrected himself mid-sentence. I added it to my spreadsheet. Patterns became clearer every day. He wasn't lying spontaneously. He was maintaining a structure. A carefully constructed web of claims that depended on each other. Structures collapse when pressure hits the wrong joint. I learned where the weak points were. My aunt found me alone in the kitchen while I was making tea. She looked around first, making sure no one else was listening. The hallway was empty. She closed the kitchen door partially and lowered her voice even though we were alone. "Do you really think you're unfit, Elena?" she asked quietly. The question mattered. Not because I needed validation or someone to defend me, but because it meant his version wasn't absolute anymore. It meant doubt had entered the room. It meant at least one person wasn't accepting the narrative as fact. I didn't defend myself. That would have felt desperate. Instead, I asked her what she'd been told. Her explanation didn't match what I'd heard from others. She thought the issue was about my judgment in decision-making. She'd been told I was making mistakes. Someone else had heard it was about my reliability, that I was unreliable and couldn't be counted on. Another person had been told it was about my inability to follow through on commitments, that I started things and didn't finish them. All different stories. All coming from the same source. All subtly designed to match what each listener already believed about potential weaknesses. I thanked her and changed the subject before she could ask more questions. But that night, I updated my spreadsheet with meticulous care. Aunt Sharon. Story emphasizes poor judgment, Cousin Lucas. Story emphasizes unreliability, Aunt Lisa. Story emphasizes follow-through issues. Contradictions were stacking like evidence. I began mapping who heard which version and when, creating a visual timeline. My brother had assumed consistency wasn't necessary. Authority was enough. He underestimated how well people remember things. Their own memories. Their own recollections of what they were told. I started asking subtle questions at gatherings, phrasing them carefully so they seemed innocent. Do you remember when that decision was made? What was the reason we decided that? How long ago did that happen? People filled in the blanks without realizing they were doing it. They offered information without understanding they were contributing to my investigation. The story was fracturing under its own weight. Then I discovered something that changed everything. A document had been referenced during the declaration, one I was never shown. A family document that supposedly outlined the concerns about me. I requested it politely. My brother hesitated for a long moment, his face showing something like calculation, like he was deciding whether to give it to me. Then he agreed too quickly, his relief visible. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. When I reviewed the document, the metadata told the real story. There were at least 6 different versions saved in the file history. Names removed in later versions that appeared in earlier ones. Language softened in some places. Phrases that sounded accusatory were reworded to sound concerned. Language hardened in other places. Neutral observations were reframed as character flaws. Paragraphs rewritten completely. Dates that didn't align with what he'd told the family about when things happened. It wasn't fraud in the traditional sense. It was manipulation. Subtle enough to pass if no one looked closely. Strategic enough that it could be explained away if questioned. Oh, I was just clarifying. I was just refining the language to be more fair. I didn't react. I thanked him politely for letting me see it. His relief was visible and immediate. He thought transparency had saved him. He thought showing me the document had diffused my potential defensiveness. Instead, it confirmed everything I'd suspected. I cross-referenced the edits with messages I'd saved from earlier. I created a detailed timeline. The document had been edited after the declaration. After he'd already told the family his narrative. After he'd already labeled me. After he'd already reshaped how they saw me. He was rewriting history in real time, adjusting the record to match his story even as he was telling it. I felt calm, not triumphant. Calm meant I was ready. Calm meant I understood what needed to happen next, and I had the patience to let it unfold. A few days later, my mother mentioned something casually over coffee in the kitchen. "Your brother is planning a final family meeting," she said, stirring her cup absently. "To settle everything permanently." I nodded like I hadn't been expecting this. But I had. I'd known this was coming. The escalation was natural. He'd made the declaration. He'd solidified the narrative. Now he needed to lock it in permanently before anyone's doubts could grow too large. A final meeting meant a final narrative. He would control every element of it. He would control the setting, choosing a room where he felt powerful. He would control the pacing, deciding when to speak, when to pause, when to let silence do the work. He would control the emotional tone, presenting himself as reluctant and burdened, doing something difficult because it was necessary. I prepared differently than he expected. I organized everything into simple sequences. No accusations. No emotional appeals. Just facts. Changes in behavior. Contradictions. I printed everything and organized it in a folder color-coded. I practiced saying nothing. I practiced letting silence do the work. In the days leading up to the meeting, my brother avoided me, which confirmed his confidence. He believed I was defeated. That belief was necessary for everything that came next. I noticed family members acting uneasy, like they sensed tension without understanding it. But no one asked questions. I didn't recruit allies. I didn't warn people. I didn't coach them on what to think. Truth works best when it arrives unannounced. The night before the meeting, I realized something crucial. One key witness had never been asked to speak. This person was closer to my brother than to me. But they valued honesty. They had a good memory. They trusted facts more than politics. They trusted me more than my brother's narrative. I had one card left to play, and I needed to play it carefully. I visited my uncle quietly the next morning before the meeting. I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't explain why I was asking or what I'd discovered. I simply asked him what he remembered about that first meeting. What had actually been decided? What were the exact words used? His version was simple and devastating to my brother's story. He recalled agreeing to a temporary arrangement, not a permanent judgment of my fitness. "We said we'd try doing things differently for a while," he said. "See how it went." But he also remembered my brother insisting on something specific. "She doesn't need to know yet. It's better if we handle this without her. That way it won't seem personal." That phrase echoed through everything. It revealed the real motive. It wasn't about protecting the family. It was about control. About reshaping the narrative without my input. Without my ability to defend myself or present my version of events. I asked if he'd be willing to speak if asked directly at the family meeting. He agreed without hesitation. He seemed to understand that something had been hidden, that something hadn't been right about the whole situation. I didn't coach him. I didn't explain my strategy. I didn't tell him what to say or how to say it. I let memory stay pure, untouched by my narrative. What he remembered was what he remembered. As I left his house, I realized my brother had built everything on a single assumption. That no one would revisit the beginning. That the past would stay fixed. That people wouldn't question the original narrative once it had been established. He forgot that people remember differently when they're finally asked. He forgot that memory is the enemy of control. Tomorrow that would matter. The living room looked staged again, arranged for maximum impact. Same chairs, same table, same lighting. My brother stood near the fireplace, the power position, and began speaking before everyone had fully settled. He outlined my supposed limitations with the same calm authority he'd used before. I watched faces as he talked. Confusion flickered where certainty used to be. His confidence had diminished slightly. Something wasn't landing the way it had the first time. He'd rehearsed this speech, I realized. But he hadn't rehearsed handling doubt. When he finished, silence followed. He looked at me, waiting for defense, for explanation, for something to react against. I didn't give it. Instead, I asked one question. Who decided I was unfit, and when? The room shifted. The air changed. He answered quickly. Too quickly. Dates fell out of order. His timeline contradicted itself. He said one thing, then corrected himself, then said something different. The confusion in the room grew visible. That's when my uncle spoke up. Precise. His memory contradicted everything my brother had just said. He described the original meeting differently. He corrected the timeline. He repeated the phrase my brother had used. She doesn't need to know yet, and let it hang in the air. The room went still. My brother tried to correct him. His voice wavered. He attempted to reframe, calling it a misunderstanding. But that word landed poorly. People don't like realizing they've been guided instead of informed. People don't like discovering that something was hidden from them. He attempted to reframe again, but his voice sounded small now. Authority had drained from it completely. He looked around the room, searching for allies, and found only confusion. Silence is uncomfortable when you're exposed. I let it stretch. Seconds became long. Minutes felt endless. No one rushed to save him. No one offered alternative explanations. My mother looked between us, uncertain for the first time since this began. She was seeing something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. I added nothing. I didn't need to. The documents were still in my bag, ready if needed. But evidence didn't need to rush either. My brother attempted to reframe once more, but his voice sounded desperate now. He tried to laugh it off, but the laughter fell flat. He tried to make it seem like a simple misunderstanding, but everyone in the room sensed it was something deeper. My cousin spoke up. Can we see the original document? Not the edited one. The original. My brother hesitated. That hesitation said more than any accusation I could make. I placed copies on the table with careful deliberation. Edit history. Version numbers. Metadata showing when changes were made. I didn't narrate them. I didn't explain them. I let everyone read. The room filled with quiet page turns. Papers passing from hand to hand. The weight of evidence becoming real and visible. My brother tried to explain intent, but intent sounded weak next to facts. I stayed composed, breathing steady. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. It was accuracy restoring itself after being deliberately distorted. Someone noticed something and voiced it aloud. The concerns about my fitness only appeared after a specific disagreement months earlier. A disagreement where I'd questioned his decision. The motive was surfacing, and it wasn't about protection. It was about being challenged. It was about someone who couldn't tolerate disagreement. The room felt different now. The air had changed. The family dynamic tilted noticeably. Questions came faster now. My brother answered slower. His explanations tangled. His attempts to clarify only made things worse. Authority drained from his voice completely. It wasn't gone, it was transferred. I finally spoke. Not defensively but clearly. I explained my silence and what it meant. I explained my observation and how it had led me to the truth. I explained my respect for the family enough not to fight emotionally. I explained how I'd chosen patience over anger because patience meant I could find facts instead of just reactions. That surprised them more than anger would have. My mother asked my brother something direct. Why didn't you ever share these updates with me directly? Why did you need to make this announcement to the whole family? He couldn't answer cleanly. His explanation fell apart. The hero narrative collapsed under scrutiny. Recognition spread across faces. Shame, disappointment, the weight of realizing how easily they'd believed a story without checking it. I felt sadness, not victory. This was still my family. The conversation continued, but my brother was no longer driving it. People asked him questions he couldn't answer cleanly. Inconsistencies he couldn't explain away. The careful structure he'd built was finally visible, and visibility was destroying it. His voice became defensive, then quiet, then almost absent. My mother turned to me. "What do you want now, Elena?" she asked. The room leaned in. They expected something sharp. Punishment. A demand that would justify the tension they felt. Instead, I told them the truth. "I want accuracy," I said. My voice didn't shake. That seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. "I want the record corrected and decisions made in the open, not whispered into existence and presented as fact. I want to be seen clearly again, without a label attached, without having to defend myself constantly. I want the family to understand what happened here, not as punishment but as truth." My brother nodded too quickly, relief flashing across his face. He thought this was mercy. He didn't yet understand that clarity isn't forgiveness. It's the beginning of accountability. It's the start of rebuilding, not reconciliation. It's the moment when consequences become real instead of theoretical. The room grew quiet, but this time the silence belonged to me. Once accuracy became the goal, everything slowed down. A careful review was suggested, then accepted. Not because people suddenly doubted my brother, though they did, but because doubt had already entered the room. As documents were revisited, small inconsistencies surfaced. Just choices, omissions, convenient interpretations. My brother sat through it all, posture stiff, confidence eroding with each clarification. I stayed composed, answering only when asked. Watching him realize this process wouldn't end quickly was necessary. He'd relied on speed and certainty. This demanded patience and truth, two things he hadn't prepared for. He came to me alone a few days later. No audience, no posture, just tired eyes and a carefully worded apology. He said he'd only been trying to protect the family, that he'd felt pressure, that things got out of hand. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him the truth. "I believe you felt justified. But justification isn't the same as honesty. An absolution without accountability is just another version of control." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply didn't absolve him. That silence seemed to weigh more than any rejection. He left knowing the family no longer needed me to be quiet for his story to hold. Change didn't arrive loudly. Rarely does. Decisions that once flowed through my brother alone were now discussed openly. Opinions were asked for, mine included, without ceremony or hesitation. The family adjusted, cautiously, like people relearning how to walk after believing one path was the only safe one. My brother spoke less. When he did, others listened differently. Authority had shifted from confidence to credibility. I noticed how often people now checked facts before agreeing with his statements. That mattered. It meant the family had learned something. I didn't reclaim space by demanding it. I occupied it naturally, the way I always had before being erased. I participated in decisions. I offered opinions. I was consulted. The rebalance wasn't punishment. It was correction. Correction, I learned, can feel like loss to those who benefited from distortion. At night, when the house was quiet, I thought about what this cost. Not just the months of being dismissed, but how easily narratives replace people. How quickly identity can be rewritten. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. I understood how silence could be mistaken for weakness, and how patience could be underestimated. I understood that sometimes doing nothing is the most strategic thing you can do. The family reached out in small ways. Apologies disguised as casual conversations, tentative invitations. I accepted them without reopening wounds. Healing didn't require rehashing everything. It required not pretending nothing happened. I noticed my brother had stopped attending some gatherings. His absence felt necessary. Accountability often creates distance before it creates growth. Time passed, and distance settled into a pattern. My brother kept to himself, rarely calling, rarely explaining himself. No one chased him. That surprised me. It meant the family was finally letting consequences exist without cushioning them. It meant they understood that some actions have natural outcomes. Conversations felt more honest now. Less performative. People asked questions instead of assuming answers had already been decided behind closed doors. I felt steadier, no longer bracing myself in rooms that once felt hostile. Distance didn't feel like division. Felt like space to recalibrate. Felt like breathing room. I didn't celebrate his withdrawal. I simply accepted it as part of the aftermath. Truth doesn't always bring people closer. Sometimes it just stops the pretending. The records were officially amended during a calm afternoon meeting. No speeches. No tension. Just acknowledgement. My name was restored where it had been quietly removed. Descriptions corrected. Decisions reframed accurately. Watching it happen felt grounding, not triumphant. This wasn't about winning, it was about being seen clearly again. The family agreed to new standards for transparency, spoken aloud so they couldn't be quietly revised later. I noticed how carefully everyone chose their words. That care mattered. It meant the story had truly changed, not just its ending. For the first time in a long while, I felt aligned with my place again. No label attached, no defense required. My brother accepted a reduced role without protest. That silence spoke louder than his earlier confidence. He avoided my eyes, not out of hatred but recognition. He understood now that the power he'd held wasn't permanent. It was borrowed from trust. And trust, once examined, can't be forced back into shape. The family didn't shame him. They didn't exile him. They simply adjusted around him, no longer centering him as the unquestioned voice. Accountability arrived not as punishment, but as reality. Natural consequences. The weight of truth. I felt no urge to push further. The balance had corrected itself. Anything more would have been ego, not justice. Closure didn't arrive in a single moment. It arrived in ease. In conversations that didn't require vigilance. In rooms where my presence felt natural again. I noticed how my shoulders relaxed without effort. How I no longer rehearsed responses before speaking. The betrayal no longer defined me. It became something that happened, not something that lingered. My brother remained distant, but the tension around his name faded. Closure, I realized, isn't reconciliation. It's freedom from needing one. It's the moment when something that felt catastrophic becomes simply part of your story. Not the only story, just a chapter. I had told the truth, fully and cleanly. What others did with it was no longer my responsibility. Healing showed up quietly. In laughter that wasn't forced. In trust rebuilt through consistency. Family gatherings felt simpler. Less strategic, more present. I stayed grounded, aware of how easily dynamics can shift. That awareness didn't make me guarded. Made me intentional. I didn't rush to fix what couldn't be fixed yet. I allowed time to do its work. Healing didn't erase what happened. It integrated it. Became more myself, not less. Stronger without becoming hard. That felt like the real victory. I was never unfit. I was inconvenient to a narrative that required obedience. When the story finally changed, it didn't change because I fought harder. It changed because I waited, watched, and let truth arrive intact. Changed because I was patient. My brother's power dissolved not through confrontation, but through exposure to light. The family learned something too, that silence can be wisdom and patience can be strategy. That the quietest person in the room isn't always the weakest. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth and let it do its work. I didn't need to announce my redemption. It unfolded naturally, recorded in corrected documents, altered behavior, restored trust. The story didn't end with applause or vindication. It ended with alignment. It ended with clarity. It ended with me being seen clearly again. And that was enough. That was everything.